Well, ladies and gentlemen, time to march ahead with our next session. And meanwhile, I do hope you're getting those tweets coming using hashtag E4m Conclave. Well, we're about to get started with another very interesting session on the rise of female tribes changing the cultural conversation by capturing global female insight. So first up, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce to you Ms. Shireen Dawa, the Global Business Director, Female Tribes, JWT Thompson. Can we have a round of applause to welcome her on stage? Well, she leads an integral group within the JWT Thompson, which has spent over 3 years developing the network's Female Tribes Insight, offering and believes strongly that the advertisers, marketers, and creators have a critically important role to play in advancing the women in business as well as society. Well, I do believe that we'll also be having the session moderated by Ms. Bindu Sethi, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of JWT Thompson India. Let's have a round of cheer to welcome her on stage as well. Well, she comes with over 3 decades of experience in advertising and marketing and lives, breathes brand strategies, consumer trends, as well as category revival. So on that note, we're going to get started with our next session. So first up, absolutely, ma'am. All right, so we're talking about a very, very enriching session once again. Can we have a very, very wonderful round of applause from across the hall? Let's welcome both of our fantastic ladies here on the stage, and let's get started. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. My only story of 9 is that I came here when I was 9 years old last. All my family is here, so I wanted to just say thanks for inviting me back, because I get to re-meet them and reconnect with all of them, which has been really fun. And I also get to share something with you that is super close to JWT's heart, and it is called Female Tribes. And Female Tribes is an insight study that's been conducted across 9 countries across the world. It's at its inception, and it's now across 16 countries across the world, taking a very, very big overview into women and their insights and their motivations. The study actually was the brainchild of one planner, one female planner who had a great vision of the fact that every brief that crossed her table was about the busy working mum. And her thought process was basically, we are, as women, defined by way more than being just a busy mum. Yes, we are mums, we are daughters, we are wives, we are individuals in our own right. And so she took it upon herself to do a great deal of desk research. And then the last 3 years has been dedicated to quant research, producing TV series, documentaries, and increasing the quant database that creates all of these great, rich insights, and has created, now we're at about 18 tribes. Some are more macro and some are very micro. So with that said, why women? Because women are indeed the largest emerging market in the world. It sounds like an interesting concept that women are a market, but indeed we're coining a phrase called the Dow Jane effect, which is basically saying that there is a huge economic power that women have, and the more power that they have in this economic situation, actually the greater growth for the success of a country. So this is not only huge for what's happening in society, it's also huge for brands. And how brands can affect change, and with the theme of building emotion, really using these insights to understand how they can reconnect with women again. In fact, what was uncovered through the study is that women in the world, specifically to India, it's about 24% of women believe that advertising resonates with them. That is an extremely low stat, and globally it's at about 9%. So when you think about that in terms of all of the work that we do, we've got a lot of emotional connections to create with women and speaking to them in a bit more of a relevant way. I'll share a little video with you, which is just an overview of what we're coining the phrase of female capital. I think you might need to play it for me. Thank
you. We want to change the conversation, to celebrate female achievement, to recognize female capital. The fact that women control 2/3 of the global consumer spend. And women increasingly are the major breadwinners. Because there's a quiet revolution going on that you've never heard of. It might surprise you, but the first computer programmer, the origins of the internet, the pioneers of the film industry, the founder of the environmental movement, and the world's foremost economists, all women. To inspire change, we need to understand female capital, because money talks. Want your movie to earn 30% more at the box office? Hire a leading lady. Want a troubled economy to recover faster? Get a woman to lead it. Want a more profitable hedge fund? Invest in a fund led by a woman. Want a more effective battalion? Promote a woman. Want a more successful business? Hire a woman. Know the value of women, because the stories of these women are the stories of our time. The new female tribes. Let's change the conversation.
So in terms of changing the conversation, we want to basically unleash this understanding that women are not just consumers, they're wealth creators. They're powerhouses within their own right. And the study globally has uncovered that there's huge enclaves of women who are choosing to put motherhood off later in life. They're also choosing to not to have children. These are big segments of unleashed capital. They're economic creators in their own right, and therefore, if we're talking to them as busy working mums and only like that in the briefs, then actually brands aren't creating those connections and not actually unleashing huge amounts of economic capital. It was in the video, but like 2/3 of the world's economy is controlled by women. If you actually think about that, it's going to be about 18 trillion by 2018, which is a massive amount of capital that we're potentially untapping. And so when we've been talking to brands, just in terms of changing that conversation and the value that we can do, there's a brand value and also a societal one as well. The phrase female capital is knowing overall what the value of women entails. There are women who are scientists, there are teachers, there are athletes, there are activists. It's not about just women at the top echelon of what they're doing. It's everyone. Everyone has value and worth and a role to play, and it isn't necessarily defined as just motherhood. The study deep dives into multiple countries. Obviously, we've brought the Indian stats here, but I think one of the most amazing things globally that we are super excited about is that even though there's a lot of tumultuous things in politics and economics and society in general, women do believe that there isn't a better time to be a woman. So 74% of Indian women believe this. And we should be celebrating that. We shouldn't be talking about the responsibilities that women have, but actually celebrating their achievements and making them understand that there are amazing, wonderful things that they are doing in the world and that they can continue to do that in a bigger way. Another thing that's a very, very interesting stat that the study uncovered is that 92% of women think that femininity is a strength, not a weakness. The global average is around 80%. So in India, this stat is off the charts. And we think this is a really important point in terms of how femininity is defined. It's about grace and energy and strength. And when we define this further, it's actually the model of femininity is merging and changing to be quite different. So whilst globally there are commonalities about confidence and independence, and in some markets like China there's a little bit more aggression in there, the two very distinct factors to point out on this are that Indian women are defining femininity as being bold, and then that's coupled with being self-disciplined. And those are two very, very important nuances that when we're talking as advertisers, how we portray women, how we portray femininity, how we portray all of those understandings and all of the things that women resonate to. It's actually, be independent, but also be bold and be brave and be self-disciplined and kind and caring within that. So actually the imagery that we put out there and how we're redefining femininity is extremely important. One of the very interesting stats that came out for us specific to India is that whilst in the rest of the world women felt that they were holding themselves back, women in India felt that there was a lot of pressure from family, from parents, and from spouses. So there's a lot of societal pressures that are going on, which is a slight outlier from the rest of the world. And we're thinking that this is because of, there's three phrases that we've coined. We've got benign patriarchy, which is obviously that, there's a specific role as an expectation that women feel they need to play. Social judgment, there's a lot of outward portrayal of how women feel that they should behave and the judgment that's cast upon them. And then the aggressive environment that's changing. And, the world is changing generally in terms of how women are interacting with the environment and societal changes. One thing that lies beneath all of this, which fits perfectly in the topic of the conversation, is actually technology is allowing women to talk to one another in a way that they never have before. And we've seen this in many, many markets where there are taboo subjects, about sex or menstruation or any of those things, where it's a very taboo, very uncomfortable subject for women to talk about generally in public. There's actually the technology that's allowing that convergence of minds meeting minds, getting information, sharing information, is opening up a whole new world, and that advertisers should be aware of this and actually being able to insert themselves in that conversation, innovating products against the needs that women have, and actually leveraging and harnessing the technology to start building that emotional connection, relevance for women even more. 93% of Indian women believe that technology has empowered them. I think the advent of Stay Uncle and things like that is one of the things that is huge in conversation at the moment. And that also, technology has given them a voice to be heard. Again, the connection, the not being left behind once going into a marriage or another family or moving country, they'd be able to keep their networks going and to communicate in a way that's never been seen before. On the flip side, we produce content. We produce stories. We produce storytelling, amazing dialogue that produces these emotional connections. And 79% of Indian women feel that on-screen role models are extremely important to them. And this stat is also true globally. So again, the imagery that we put out about femininity is critical, and the images that we put out in screen is critical as well. So how women are seen, how women show up, what roles they're playing, is massively important. And when we're saying role models, we don't mean sort of, the very high to achieve role models. It's every day. Everyone in this room being a role model. Every story that's told in media is a role model. And one thing, if you take that stat and then you overlay it with this one, actually all of these on-screen role models encourage women to be more ambitious and more assertive. We work with the Gina Davis Institute, who lobbies Hollywood to get more women to be leading ladies. And actually there's a statistic that around 30% of box office hits are more popular if you put a leading lady in. And I think this is true. If you show a woman in a certain role, they want to be ambitious and they can see it, they can be it, is Gina Davis's actual slogan. One of the things to remember, and again about the femininity, is that 88% of women believe that they're often portrayed as sexual objects on television. So again, we have a role as marketeers and advertisers to actually change that, and a responsibility to women to show them in other ways and to have other roles over and above being sexual objects or just and with that being overlaid on top of the fact that what people see in culture really, really does matter. So every one of us in this room can start changing this conversation, changing the dialogue, and changing the story, and changing the narrative. we can definitely show different ways for women to aspire to be individuals in their own right, to taking on different challenges. Women want a voice in culture, and they have a very strong voice in culture, with 2/3 of women being with 50% of women being the breadwinner in a household, coupled with the fact that they've got new ambitions and new ways of looking at the world. It's actually our responsibility to bring that to life in content. One of the examples which we've got from JWT is about this conversation highlighting potentially taboo subjects in a way that women resonate with. So I just want to play you a piece of film. Could you play the film, please?
Hi, guys. Hi. I'm Radhika Vaz, and I have my chums. Aunt Flo. Cousin Red. Yeah. See, we women have communist-sounding code to describe our period.
007 would have trouble deciphering those, and we all know that he knows more about women than anybody else, right?
Anything except period. Because if you say period, the whole world will explode. See, for us to say that we have our period is like admitting something very shameful, like very, something that's hideously embarrassing. Like as if you have herpes or a crush on Chulbul Pandey. And where does this whole I'm down business even come from? Like where does it originate? Who invented it? Why do they make it into I'm down? Is it to reflect the state of my mind or the state of my body, or because it's, it's down there? If a man had his period, he would be unapologetic. It would be like, bro, I got my period, bro. Yeah, my pee game. I'm the pee man. Yeah. And I bet they would hire like a famous cricketer who would be hired as the brand ambassador for the man pad. Yeah. And if he stained his cricketing whites, he wouldn't be embarrassed like we would be. He wouldn't be like, oh my God, he's stained. He'd be like, no stain, no gain. Yeah. I'll tell you one thing a man would never say. He would never say, I'm down. No. And you know what? Me too. I'm not down.
So there's a perfect example of taking an extremely taboo subject and actually, shining a light on the fact that women are not down when they have their periods, and changing the conversation and changing their dialogue, and actually empowering women in a really, really different way that's relevant for a brand as well. I think that totally aligns with the fact that there's an emotional connection being built there from an absolute insight and truth that, women shouldn't be ashamed of having their periods. And, for young women as well, this was, 4 of these films using digital media to reach them, using, different types of tone. There's a wide range of tones in this as well, to allow women to interact with the content as they want and to share it. And again, that's one way that we're saying, how technology has brought people together. Sharing this with your girlfriends and being able to have that conversation is a very different type of conversation than potentially, women dancing around in white outfits or lying perfectly in bed, not moving, because that's not what happens when you have your period. So really what we're asking is that content is actually changed. The images of which we portray, the stories of which we tell about women, actually really puts different types of role models on screen, so that everything that we do actually really represents the way the world works and really is about real women and real true insights. And we really believe that in doing this together, that role models can change the world, and that together it's our collective responsibility to be a role model for each and every female out there. So thank you.
Um, can you tell, Shireen, can you talk a little bit more about, apart from the fact that you had this, Rachel got bored writing or briefing creative people about mums and busy mums, and it almost seems, and it sometimes seems to me that we only seen as in certain roles, as if somebody forgot that we were people, really. A little bit more about how you thought this study through, because it took 4 years for us to put it all together. Let's discuss that first, and then we'll come back to discussing a little bit about the Indian insights.
I mean, initially, all joking aside, it really was because when you look at the majority of products in the world, a lot of them are targeted at women. And when you look at the majority of briefs that are overlaid on that, 90% of those briefs, if not 100% of them, are about mum. And I think that the truth of it is when Rachel started the study, it was like, well, we are defined by so much more. There's a climate change. We're calling it a cultural climate change in the world of the ascension of women again, gaining the power back, embracing who they are as women, and really taking on more roles. I mean, Hillary Clinton in the election, there was a lot of commentary about her in terms of her femininity. Is she really acting into her truest self? And I think that's actually quite an interesting thing. When Christine Lagarde, for instance, all these women heading up very, very powerful institutions, and then we, as advertisers, the brief comes through the table and we're pigeonholed as one group. And I think when she started it off in terms of all the desk research, all of the stories that we are telling are not all the stories that really exist in history. So one of the interesting stats in here is that women have been airbrushed from history. There's a belief that the theory of relativity was co-written. No one knows that. Jeans, the cotton gin mill was apparently so jeans, all the cotton we wear was created by a woman, but women weren't allowed patents, so it's not owned by her, it's owned by Eli Whitney. So there's many, many stories that were untold, and that's what she started to uncover. And then we did the quant research in the 9 countries. We chose very, very different countries around the world so we would get diverse reads. And actually what wound up happening is we realized that there were way more similarities globally than differences.
Yep. While I was going through the study, one of the things that struck me really was that Indian women over-indexed on women for women.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Actually, there are 3 findings which are really of importance to us, which this study reveals. And I'll ask Shireen to talk about those in the world versus the globe versus us. And the first of them is that Indian women believe that women should support women. So that's one. The second is actually in line with the theme, which is they believe technology is changing them. And the third one is to do with their sexuality. On these 3, we are very different from, in our thoughts, from the globe. So what does the globe, do the rest of the countries say about women for supporting women? How's that?
There's a resounding sort of. There's only a couple of outliers in Europe where women do not support other women, and there are very specific reasons why. But in India, it does really, really, really pop. There is an absolute belief that women empower other women, and there are natural supports and networks. But I actually want to throw that back to you, because you're the expert on India, so I can talk globally, but for everyone in here, especially with the technology overlay, I think that's important too.
So on the technology bit, leapfrogging technology, the technology helping Indian women leapfrog. Now, there are 3 things that we are seeing which women see as barriers to them doing what they like to do. Now, the first one is benign patriarchy. Let's leave the outliers out. Let's leave highly aggressive or highly empowering households out. In the middle mass of the Indian households, women are brought up protected. Now, that protection is actually a barrier to them doing what they feel like doing. So that's one of the things we see. The other thing that we see, and Shireen spoke about it in her presentation, which is social judgment. We are constantly, because of benign patriarchy, we are constantly conscious about what judgment who is casting upon us. And the third, even bigger barrier is that stepping out is such a big deal because of the aggressive environment outside. So what we find from women, and we find in the study, that women are actually, through technology, living in the cyber world, doing what they feel like. They're business women, they are engaging with the opposite sex, and they're finding ways to live where they are not in the eyes of the people, that the benign patriarch, so to say. And therefore, that's creating a completely new emotion. The unfortunate thing is that in communication, we're not using those emotions. We're using very, very typical, similar emotions. We are using emotions of being a mom, emotions of being a girlfriend, emotions of being a wife. But we've really left out the entire space of the emotion of being a woman and a person.
To talk a little bit about the role of mums, because this is not a study to say that women are not wanting to be mums at all. I brought that stat up because there's a very extreme statistic in the United States of that being a trend. There are global stats of, as I said, women putting off children till later, but in India, it's not the case about that at all.
So that's the other interesting, revealing study, interesting part of the study is that women are not willing to give up families. That's very important. The family is very important. And you know, Shireen talks about role models and achievement, the fact that women want women as role models, and women want the achievements to be spoken of. And one of the interesting things in the study is that women see the creation of their family as an achievement. So constructing a family is a big achievement for women. So when we show women just as servicers of the family, we're not doing justice to the way we portray them in communication, because they see themselves as matriarchs, as powerful women who actually are thinking women who create and construct a family. So that's one bit of this. I think the study also reveals to us that there is no contradiction between them being powerful women and them being family women. Family is the environment in which they thrive. They construct different families or differentiate themselves in the way they are as people, and that bit. Shireen, I'd like you to talk about that lovely piece of communication you did for the 10-month communication.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting in terms of how would you use this study, because I think this is an insight study. It is not to replace marketeers' segmentation. So you could take a segmentation study and overlay the insights on top of it, and then actually start to mine it a bit further. And one of the brands that we've been working with actually was the target audience was new mums. Now, the logical way to go about doing that on a brief would say we're targeting mums who have just had babies, and we want to sell them powdered milk. The brief came through, and we had a long conversation about it strategically, and it was actually, we need to target her as she's a woman who's just had a child. It's a very, very different way of framing a brief up, and therefore your content that comes out of it was actually targeting her and the emotions she experiences in the 10th month after she's had her baby. And that 10th month is actually quite a difficult month because she's alone, typically. She's at home, she's got a newborn, and no one asks her how she is. Everyone says, how's the baby? Here's the present for the baby. Let's celebrate the baby, which is amazing. But in this piece of work, there is an absolute raw emotion that comes out when the brand says, and how do you feel? And all of a sudden, she's got an amazing emotional connection to that brand because they care about her. And if they care about her, they care about her baby. And I think that's a very, very interesting way of utilizing the insight study as opposed to typically what you would do is look after baby with great, nutrient-rich milk from breast, from powdered milk, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a different way of applying the thinking.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about that piece of work when I see it is that it has a high degree of sensitivity to the way a mother feels, and it treats her like a human being, not this goddess who is totally in love with her baby and can do everything else. It's irrelevant that we talk about goddesses in India, because I think all women are protesting that they don't want to be goddesses. But 2 points. One is that I think the interesting thing to me on the study was that if you were to look at some of the things the women are saying, you'd be able to differentiate brands that speak to women and categories that speak to women in various ways, because the tendency is that if you're going to talk about busy mothers and busy housewives, your brands are going to look similar. So that's interesting. The other thing that we are seeing because of technology is the third tribe is this, what we call the shy sexuals. So at least 25% of Indian women say that they are okay with one-night stands. Now, and that takes me back to what we are seeing because of social judgment and benign patriarchy. All of that is under the table and it's not spoken about. And somehow marketeers and communication people feel and believe that if that were the conversation on the table, women would shy away. My contention is the great thing about this study is if we change the narrative, then the narrative would feed itself. Because look at the narrative of the women athletes, right? So that's a narrative that will feed itself, and we are going to see many more Indian women excelling in sports, because that's a narrative that we've started. So that's the other interesting thing. Of course, there were 55% of women who said that no sex before marriage, but I think they might not have been quite, because this was the internet using group, people who are on, women who are on mobiles. They were answering the survey, so a good cut of urban India.
We'll see how it turns, though, because the study's living, right? Obviously, because it has to be a living study, because we've got to see when we've got these benchmarks that are out there now, how does it keep changing? So even with, we'll keep the thread of Trump going through it. With Trump coming into power, I mean, how is that going to affect women in America? We don't know. We'll see. We'll see how sentiment changes when we do the study again. We're trying to do it every half year. So it'll be interesting to, especially even with Brexit, what happens with that. So there's lots of societal things that we're measuring as well in this study too.
So can you, Shireen, could you talk about some of the new briefs that you're writing? Not specifically about brands, but the kind of tacks you're taking in your new briefs to include some of the findings. And to change the narrative.
The first thing is actually just having the conversation. I think this is why we're just being really clear that it is truly an insight study. So it is not meant to, we are very aware that brands spend a lot of money on segmentation and working out their target audiences and stuff. So it's actually to give you real insight. So what we're doing with all the briefs that come through is running it through the lens of, okay, table the actual original traditional thinking. If we didn't have that baggage of busy mum, how would we actually speak to this, this person, this human? And I think that's one of the things that the stories that we create, the emotions, these are human achievements, so they're human challenges. So in our pioneering process at JWT, we come together as collaborators from every single department to actually come into the dream phase to actually then say, okay, what is actually the human challenge that we're trying to overcome? And I think that is really important and alludes back to the first conversation that was had about how agencies are shifting models and how we're collaborating in different ways. And I think that's critical because creativity can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be just from a creative's mind. So, tech first, account first, planning, whatever. But as long as those disciplines are working together in collaborative ways, then we can start to change the conversation via brief out.
Right. would you say after doing the study that the research that we do, if we don't think about newer narratives and we don't do exploratory stuff like this, really breakthrough different stuff like this, we tend to, even in research, assume certain roles, and therefore we get back a similar kind of data. Because, you know, from what I hear from storytelling is that quite a lot of the input into this, into the female tribes and the exploration came from finding new thoughts through social media. And those new thoughts weren't being reflected through standard normal research. So narratives always, you know, there's a lot of give and take in the narrative, and that's how new narratives are born.
Yeah, and we're trying to partner with people like Kantar, who they're doing online panels for us, and they're doing them in non-branded ways, so we actually truly get real insights. So if clients want to find out very specific things and they don't want to use the traditional research ways, you can open up panels, you can work with different media channels, different publications to start to mine for those. And I think it's really important. We have to bear in mind with this study is that we're not creating new stereotypes. So I think, you know, like there's that issue of like, oh, the old stereotype, oh, the new stereotype, and then we're going to cast that on someone else, and then that will get fed back to us again. That's where these are truly insights to utilize in the best way that we can, so that we don't say, okay, all women now want to be high achieving, over empowered, you know, bold, assertive. You know, that women and men have very similar traits. Yes, we do, you know, yes, there are some ones like empathy in the workplace that potentially women demonstrate more, but I think what we're trying to say is men are involved in this conversation as well. You know, we've forever, you know, spoken about male achievements, and now we're talking about female achievements and not responsibilities. And I think that's where we don't want to create new stereotypes. We actually want to say, let's talk about the human challenge, the human beliefs, and use insights to inform ourselves to get more emotional storytelling out there.
And importantly, that I think women's achievements are what women want to hear and see. I think that's the most important thing that I've seen in the data. We can take
any questions?
Questions from audience.
Is there a microphone? Oh, do you want to borrow my mic?
Yeah, I wanted to figure out why the elephant in the room is not being discussed, which is that religious practices, extremely prevalent in India and even in developed markets like the US, put women at a natural disadvantage vis-a-vis men. All religions have been codified by men, deliberately well thought out to put women at a huge disadvantage, almost at a subservient level, treated like objects. All the stereotypes come out of religion actually, over thousands of years. Across religions, I'm not differentiating any. And you find that even despite all media, internet, modern communication, education, the religious clergy is still male dominated. And when you go into, forget the rural, even in the educated middle class, women are scared to accept what they can do because of the fear of religious beliefs. Am I going against my religious beliefs if I wear a miniskirt and go to a dance club? Am I breaking a taboo if I work? Am I breaking a taboo if I choose not to have kids and focus on my career? Am I making God angry if I don't wear a headscarf? There is too much of anti-female stuff in religion. It's shocking that it's not coming out much among. I don't see women angry enough about male-dominated religion worldwide.
We are good at hiding our anger. But
I
anyway,
think you shouldn't hide anger anymore about it.
Okay, so there's an interesting piece of data. Of course, what you're saying is absolutely right. And if we went out there to explore that, and as marketeers, we always walk on the edge not to offend anybody and so on. But there's an interesting piece of data in this study which says what is impacting your life most, and women are saying technology at something like 98%, and they're saying religion at 28%. So that's an interesting thing to focus on, that when you say, ask all women, the educated internet-using woman who's answered this survey, and we've kind of the sample is weighted, 28% of them are saying the religious. Having said that, social judgment, when we say that technology is helping them leapfrog social judgment, we mean also social judgment emanating out of religious beliefs. So yeah, I mean, it's absolutely, but women classically have not ever believed in riots. We are nesters. So if we rioted and created a nest at the same time, we destroy our own nests, so we don't believe in riots. So you can imagine who believes in them then.
There's actually two other points as well, is that from a religious customs piece, we've done some work in Saudi specifically about this, and there is another a thing we have to be very careful about again, this judgment, right? So we're judging that as not something that is accepted, whereas we've been told by some Saudi women to say, just back off a little bit, because you don't necessarily understand where we're coming from either. And then that, coupled with something extremely interesting, is that there are amazing amounts of female Saudi entrepreneurs who are breaking barriers, but they're doing it in their own way. So I think we've just got to be extremely aware of cultural nuances when we're using these insights, and I do believe that's true, because there has to be a level of respect that is served to religious nuances. And then the other piece of it is the role models, and I keep coming back to this again and again and again, because if you've got role models who are women within those religions who are demonstrating certain things, it actually removes taboos. So you're showing that actually it's okay to be brave and to be bold, and you can do it in quite a not a quiet way, but a way that moves mountains without causing sort of fractious issues like you're talking about, like no riots. So I think what we have to do is we have to provide those role models, and we have to provide the content outlets and the technology and the enabling of that technology. And that's why I was saying, just the innovations and the utilization of apps that brands can do to get that information out to women is huge. And then the groundswell of the climate change is actually in women's hands, as opposed to us saying, you need to get up and change this, and because again, that's us saying what women should be doing, as opposed to women trying to do it their own way.
Right.
There's a lady at the back.
Yeah,
the lady at the back.
There's
just getting a mic.
The white jacket.
Hi, my name is Shweta Sinha. I work with Business World. I've been thinking, some months back I read in Times of India that however a woman may be successful, and they quoted some research, however a woman may be successful at work, she's truly happy when her domestic scenario is perfect. So she's happy when her children are doing good, when she's got a good relationship going with her husband, and that's a true measure of success. So all this while we've been discussing what I think is more of nurture rather than nature. So are men and women differently wired? Is it more a question of nature than nurture? What are your thoughts on that?
I could create an analogy and say men are truly happy if they're successful at their jobs. Yeah. So women are truly happy if they're successful as nesters, and men are truly happy if they're successful at their jobs. But men also have families, and women also have jobs.
True.
and success. So, I mean, I think sometimes, I think there's too much of judgment being passed from one to the other. And if you really look at it, what are we saying? We are saying through this study that women believe that they want to be treated as people. I mean, it's as simple as that. Not as mothers, daughter-in-laws, daughters, but as people. Yeah, they have other roles, just like men have other roles, but they're people. And those people have ambitions, the needs for achievement, and so on and so forth. You know, there's a very interesting thing that I've come across after 30 years of going to meeting young girls. The Indian young girl, when she got married 30 years ago, she walked into her marital home, and she was completely cut off from her whatever she knew of life before, her friends, her family, everybody. What technology is enabling her to do is to keep connected with all these people. And this is a phenomenon that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. And the biggest support she's getting, and that's where this Women for Women thing becomes so big, is the biggest support she's getting is when she's seeing other women talk about achievements, or talk about things that they are doing. I mean, you saw some of that in Queen. And that is telling her that she can be a person in addition to being a nester. So that's something to think about.
There's also something in the study that we've got that when a woman doesn't necessarily define herself as a mum first, so she defines herself particularly by sort of a career in terms of whatever she does, and that can be whatever type of career it is. And I think if women are enabled to act the way they truly want to act in the workplace, which is using a few more softer sort of empathetic kindness traits, which they typically haven't been able to in the past. So with all the leadership moves that are going on, that stuff is being celebrated, right? So actually, you can show an emotion in the office and it's actually okay. So if we take that, then women could actually be happier in the workplace, which actually then might skew the answer to that question, as opposed to, you know, we're not necessarily doing everything we can to keep women in the workplace generally. You know, the study uncovers that actually women are super proactive and highly productive when they come back from having kids. But we don't necessarily nurture that in the world or pay attention to that. So I think we as businesses have to take that on as well. We've got a responsibility as role models within the workplace to identify that as well. And there are many dads who are staying at home now as well in the world. So I think there's a lot of shifts that are starting to happen, which is why I think we'll have that study. You know, in some of the European countries, there are dads groups who are all out there, and you know, they're looking after the kids, and the women are in work and having a whale of a time. So I think we've got to bear that in mind when we're using this study. I think we've got time for one. No question. Yes, one last question.
We'll take one last question. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to ask you, one of the major issues that's coming to light is a pay gap between women and men. So there's a lot of talk about it, there's a lot of noise about it on social media, like Hollywood actresses talking about it, reacting to it. But do you think, like, as a media, we can influence and, like, bring a change about it? Like, is it really affecting, or is it just the noise?
I mean, it's interesting, because there was a week ago in the UK, there was a whole thing about organizations should send women home at 3:45 or something because they make 18% less, and that's 18% of the day, and everyone should go home. And I was laughing because I'm like, I can't go home. It's 3:45. So it's like, what am I going to do? I've got meetings at 4, at 5, you know. So on and on. So I think there's an intent that is right behind it, but when we've been talking about this in other markets, unfortunately, it also lies with women, right? It's a bit of a controversial thing to say, but women need to speak up and ask for pay rises, and ask to be heard, and ask to be counted. That's why, again, we're talking about role models, because if you see women who are doing that around you, and you've got a mentor Like in an organization like JWT, there's mentor programs where you can go and talk to someone who can actually then encourage you to go and speak up. That's really important, especially for young women. And if you start to change that at a younger age, then we can start to affect that later. And I think that's where the responsibility lies. And therefore, it's not noise, because then it actually happens, as opposed to, there's awareness, but awareness doesn't necessarily mean that then perpetuates change. So.
Thank you, Shireen.
Thank you.
That was fantastic.
Thanks, everyone.